Have you ever been on the verge of achieving something important? A career milestone, a healthier lifestyle, or a meaningful relationship, only to watch yourself inexplicably sabotage your own progress? Maybe you procrastinated until a deadline passed, picked a fight with your partner right when things were going well, or abandoned a healthy routine just as it was beginning to show results. I know I have. A few years ago, I committed to transforming my health after a concerning doctor's visit. For 3 months, I was consistent, exercising regularly, preparing nutritious meals, and getting proper sleep. The results were undeniable. My energy soared, my mood improved, and my lab results showed significant progress. Friends started noticing and commenting on the positive changes. Then, seemingly out of nowhere, I began making small exceptions to my routine. Just one missed workout became 3. Just this once treats became daily indulgences. Despite seeing clear evidence that these new habits were improving my life in every measurable way, I gradually abandoned all of them, returning to the same patterns that had compromised my health in the first place. Only months later did I recognize that this wasn't the first time I'd sabotaged my well-being, just as positive changes were taking root. In the aftermath, I was left asking myself the same questions so many of us face. Why do I keep getting in my own way? This pattern of self-sabotage is frustrating, incredibly common, but rarely do we understand its deeper psychological roots. Today, we are diving into the profound insights of Carl Jung, one of history's most influential psychologists, who discovered that self-sabotage isn't simply a matter of bad habits or weak willpower. Jung revealed that these self-destructive patterns stem from complex mechanisms in our unconscious mind, mechanisms that paradoxically believe they're protecting us. In this video, you'll discover why your mind sometimes works against your conscious desires, how to recognize the hidden patterns driving your self-sabotage, and most importantly, how to begin the journey toward integration and wholeness that Jung believed was our ultimate psychological purpose. Before we dive into Jung's insights on self-sabotage, let's briefly understand the man behind these revolutionary ideas. Carl Gustav Jung, born in Switzerland in 1875, began as a close collaborator of Sigmund Freud, but eventually broke away to develop his own school of analytical psychology. Where Freud focused primarily on repressed sexual desires, Jung expanded our understanding of the unconscious mind in dramatic ways. He distinguished between the personal unconscious, containing our individual repressed experiences and forgotten memories, and what he called the collective unconscious, a deeper layer shared by all humans, containing universal patterns and images he termed archetypes. Jung introduced concepts that have profoundly influenced not just psychology, but literature, film, and even how we understand ourselves today. Terms like introvert and extrovert, the concept of the persona, and the idea of complexes all originated with Jung. But perhaps his most relevant contribution for understanding self-sabotage is his concept of the shadow, those parts of ourselves we've disowned, repressed, or never developed. As Jung famously said, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life, and you will call it fate." Jung's framework offers unique insights into our self-destructive patterns precisely because he recognized that the unconscious mind isn't just a repository of repressed desires. It's an active, intelligent force with its own agenda, sometimes at odds with our conscious goals. So, what exactly is self-sabotage from a Jungian perspective? At its core, self-sabotage occurs when unconscious forces within us actively work against our conscious intentions. It's not simply failure or bad luck. It's a pattern of behavior where we undermine ourselves in predictable ways, often at crucial moments. In modern life, this takes countless forms. There's procrastination, where we delay important tasks despite knowing the consequences. Self-medication with substances, food, or other distractions that provide temporary relief but long-term harm. Relationship sabotage, where we push away people we care about just as things get serious. And career self-limitation, where we play small, avoid opportunities, or create conflicts in professional settings. The patterns are remarkably consistent. Just as things are about to change for the better, just as we're on the cusp of growth or achievement, something in us seems to pull the emergency brake. But here's the paradox that Jung recognized. Why would any part of us deliberately harm the very goals we consciously desire? Why would we repeatedly undermine our own happiness, success, or well-being? The answer lies deeper than we might expect. Jung believed that the primary source of self-sabotage is what he called the shadow, the repository of all the aspects of ourselves that we've disowned, repressed, or never developed. From early childhood, we learn which parts of ourselves are acceptable to our family, culture, and society, and which parts must be hidden away. Maybe you learned that anger wasn't allowed in your household, or that certain talents or interests were discouraged. Perhaps vulnerability was met with rejection, or ambition was seen as selfish. Whatever the specific content, we all develop what Jung called a persona, our social mask that shows the world only the acceptable parts of ourselves. But those disowned aspects don't simply disappear. They're pushed into the shadow, where they continue to exist and influence us from below the threshold of consciousness. Here's the crucial insight. The shadow contains not just negative qualities, but often our most vital and creative energies. When we disown aspects of ourselves, we lose access to their potential positive expressions as well. The relationship between the shadow and self-sabotage is direct and powerful. When significant shadow material remains unacknowledged, it tends to emerge in distorted, often destructive ways. For example, if you've disowned your anger, you might find yourself passive-aggressive or mysteriously exhausted around certain people. If you've repressed your ambition, you might unconsciously undermine others' success while never pursuing your own. If you've denied your need for connection, you might create drama in relationships, right when genuine intimacy becomes possible. In everyday life, we also project our shadow material onto others, seeing in them the very qualities we've disowned in ourselves. The person who triggers you most intensely is often carrying a projection of your shadow. As Jung famously said, everything that irritates us about others can lead us to an understanding of ourselves. Closely related to the shadow is what modern Jungians might call the wounded inner child. Those parts of us carrying unresolved pain from early experiences. Jung recognized that childhood wounds create what he called complexes, emotionally charged clusters of thoughts and feelings that can be triggered in present situations. These complexes often form the core of our self-sabotaging patterns. Consider what psychologists call repetition compulsion, our unconscious tendency to recreate painful situations from our past. From a Jungian perspective, this isn't simply masochism. Rather, it's the psyche's attempt to master what once overwhelmed us, to finally resolve what was left unresolved. If, for instance, you experienced abandonment as a child, you might unconsciously create situations where relationships end, not because you want to be alone, but because your psyche is trying to resolve that original wound by gaining control over the abandonment experience. Parental complexes play a particularly powerful role here. If your father was highly critical, you might internalize an inner critic that sabotages your achievements. If your mother was emotionally unavailable, you might find yourself unable to receive nurturing even when it's freely offered. What makes these patterns so persistent is that they originally developed as survival strategies. The child who learned to hide their authentic feelings to avoid rejection was doing what was necessary in that environment. The problem comes when these strategies continue long after they're needed, undermining the very things we now consciously want. As Jung put it, "I am not what happened to me, I am what I choose to become." But that choice requires becoming conscious of how our past continues to shape our present. One of Jung's most revolutionary insights was his understanding of the psyche as a self-regulating system that naturally seeks wholeness and balance. From this perspective, self-sabotage isn't simply a dysfunction. It often serves a teleological function, meaning it's purposeful, even if that purpose isn't immediately apparent to our conscious mind. When we experience self-sabotage, it may actually be the psyche's attempt to maintain psychological equilibrium. If one aspect of our personality becomes too dominant or rigid, another part may emerge to create balance. A workaholic might suddenly develop an irresistible urge to abandon responsibilities, not because they're lazy, but because their psyche is demanding the balance their conscious mind has denied. Self-sabotage can also function as protection against ego inflation. When we become too identified with success, achievement, or a particular self-image, the shadow may emerge to humble us, reminding us of our wholeness that includes both light and shadow aspects. Sometimes self-sabotage forces us to integrate disowned aspects of ourselves that are necessary for our growth. The person who has built their identity around being needed by others might sabotage their helping role, creating space to discover who they are beyond their caretaking function. Jung called this principle enantiodromia, the tendency of things to turn into their opposites, especially when taken to extremes. Push too far in one direction, and the psyche will create a compensatory movement in the other direction. The harder you repress something essential, the more forcefully it eventually emerges. This understanding transforms how we see our self-defeating patterns. They're not just obstacles to overcome, but potentially meaningful communications from parts of ourselves seeking integration. At the heart of Jungian psychology is the concept of individuation, the lifelong process of psychological development toward wholeness, integration, and self-realization. Self-sabotage, in its deepest sense, can be understood as resistance to this individuation process. While we consciously desire growth, parts of us fear the transformation it requires. As Jung famously observed, there is no coming to consciousness without pain. This reveals a profound paradox. We may fear becoming who we truly are even more than we fear failure. True growth often requires abandoning familiar self-concepts, relationship patterns, and defense mechanisms that, while limiting, provide a sense of security and identity. The ego, our conscious sense of self, naturally defends against change, even positive change, because it represents a kind of psychological death. The old self must die for the new self to emerge. The more significant the potential growth, the more powerful the resistance often becomes. Jung wrote, "The most terrifying thing is to accept oneself completely." Our self-sabotage may actually reflect this terror, the fear of claiming our full potential and responsibility. As he noted, people will do anything, no matter how absurd, to avoid facing their own souls. Yet Jung also observed that the privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are. This tension between our yearning for authenticity and our fear of transformation lies at the heart of many self-sabotaging patterns. Identifying your specific forms of self-sabotage is the essential first step toward transformation. Jung believed that dreams provide a special window into shadow content. Pay attention to recurring dream themes, particularly ones featuring pursuits, missing something important, or being unprepared. These often reflect unconscious conflicts around your goals. Another Jungian technique is active imagination, a form of directed daydreaming where you dialogue with different aspects of yourself. Try imagining your self-sabotaging behavior as a character or entity with its own voice and perspective. What would it say about its purpose in your life? What does it fear would happen if it stopped interfering? Signs that you're projecting shadow content include strong emotional reactions that seem disproportionate to situations, persistent conflicts with the same types of people, or criticizing others for qualities you deny in yourself. Honest self-reflection is crucial. Ask yourself, what patterns have repeatedly appeared in my life? At what point do things typically go wrong? What were you taught was unacceptable about yourself growing up? What aspects of others trigger strong reactions in you? Consider these journal prompts for shadow work. When have I felt most ashamed of myself, and what qualities was I expressing? What traits do I most strongly dislike in others? What aspects of myself do I try hardest to hide or control? What do I fear others would reject about me if they really knew? When and how do I self-sabotage most predictably? Remember Jung's insight that everything that irritates us about others can lead us to an understanding of ourselves. Your strongest reactions often point directly to your shadow material. Jung's approach to overcoming self-sabotage wasn't about eliminating the shadow, but integrating it, developing a conscious relationship with these disowned aspects of ourselves. This marks a crucial distinction between repression and conscious containment. Repression pushes unwanted material deeper into the unconscious, where it gains power and emerges in distorted forms. Conscious containment acknowledges these aspects, while choosing how to express them constructively. Several practical techniques can help with shadow integration. Dream analysis involves recording and reflecting on dreams, looking for shadow figures and disowned aspects of yourself. Pay special attention to characters in your dreams that evoke strong emotions or represent qualities opposite to your conscious identity. Active imagination, as we discussed earlier, creates dialogue with unconscious content through writing, art, or meditation. You can give voice to different parts of yourself and develop a relationship with them. Symbolic understanding means looking at your self-sabotaging behaviors as symbolic communications rather than simply problems to eliminate. Ask what each pattern might be trying to accomplish or express. Creative expression offers pathways to integrate shadow material through art, writing, movement, or other forms that allow unconscious content to emerge in constructive ways. Jung emphasized developing an ongoing relationship with the unconscious rather than trying to solve it once and for all. This relationship becomes a dialogue between conscious and unconscious, ego and shadow, that continues throughout life. Integration differs fundamentally from fixing or eliminating shadow aspects. Instead of rejecting these parts, we learn to understand their original protective purpose while finding more constructive expressions for their energy. The aggressive impulses you once denied might become healthy assertiveness. The wildness you repressed might become creativity. The vulnerability you protected might become authentic connection. Jung's insights have influenced numerous contemporary approaches to psychology and personal development. Internal family systems, IFS therapy, developed by Richard Schwartz, echoes Jung's understanding of the psyche as containing multiple parts or subpersonalities that need integration rather than elimination. This approach helps people develop relationships with their protective parts, similar to how Jung advocated relating to the shadow. Parts work in various therapeutic modalities. Similarly, reflects Jung's understanding that psychological healing comes through relationship with, rather than rejection of, different aspects of ourselves. Modern shadow work has expanded Jung's approaches with specific practices for identifying and integrating disowned aspects of the self. Practitioners like Robert Johnson and Debbie Ford have developed accessible methods for working with shadow material in everyday life. While Jung developed his theories primarily through clinical observation and cross-cultural study of symbols, modern neuroscience has provided unexpected support for some of his insights. Research on implicit bias, the adaptive unconscious, and even neuroplasticity aligns with Jung's understanding of unconscious processes and the potential for integration. Case studies abound of individuals who've successfully integrated shadow material and transformed self-sabotaging patterns. These often follow a similar arc: initial awareness of the pattern, recognition of its origins, compassionate understanding of its protective purpose, and gradually developing new ways of meeting underlying needs. A central principle in Jung's approach was what he called holding the tension of opposites, the ability to consciously experience conflicting aspects of ourselves without immediately trying to resolve the discomfort. Jung believed psychological growth requires embracing paradox rather than seeking premature resolution. The capacity to hold contradiction, to be both vulnerable and strong, ambitious and compassionate, independent and connected, marks mature development. From this tension emerges what Jung called the transcendent function, a new psychological position that transcends the original opposition. This isn't compromise or middle ground, but a genuinely new perspective that includes and transforms the conflicting elements. This explains why quick fixes and simplistic solutions fail to address the root of self-sabotage. When we try to simply eliminate unwanted patterns without understanding their deeper purpose, they tend to return in different forms. Jung encouraged us to see wisdom in resistance and gifts hidden in our struggles. The very patterns that cause us the most difficulty often contain vital energy and information essential for our wholeness. As Jung wrote, "The attainment of wholeness requires one to stake one's whole being. Nothing less will do." Jung understood the confrontation with the shadow as part of what he called the hero's journey, a universal pattern of psychological development found across cultures and mythologies. In this journey, self-sabotage isn't merely an obstacle, but a necessary encounter with the disowned parts of ourselves that must be integrated for true growth. The hero doesn't eliminate the shadow but transforms it, incorporating its energy and wisdom into a more complete self. This journey toward wholeness, what Jung called individuation, doesn't end with perfect harmony or the absence of inner conflict. Rather, it creates the capacity to contain and consciously relate to all aspects of ourselves, making choices informed by both conscious values and unconscious wisdom. Psychological maturity, in Jung's vision, isn't about perfection, but integration. The ability to acknowledge our complexity, embrace our contradictions, and act from an awareness of both our light and shadow. As you reflect on your own patterns of self-sabotage, I encourage you to approach them not just as problems to solve, but as invitations to deeper self-knowledge. Ask what these patterns might be trying to protect or express. Consider what disowned aspects of yourself might be seeking acknowledgement. Remember that this work requires courage, the courage to look honestly at yourself, to face what you've denied, and to claim the fullness of who you are. As Jung wrote, your vision will become clear only when you can look into your own heart. Who looks outside dreams, who looks inside awakes. We've explored how Carl Jung's profound insights reveal the deeper psychological roots of self-sabotage, how our disowned shadow aspects, unresolved wounds, and the self-regulating nature of the psyche can lead us to undermine our conscious goals. We've seen how the journey toward individuation requires integrating rather than eliminating these shadow elements, and how this integration leads to greater wholeness and authenticity. I'd love to hear about your experiences with self-sabotage and shadow work in the comments below. What patterns have you noticed in your life? What insights have resonated most with you from this exploration? If you're interested in learning more, I recommend starting with Jung's Man and His Symbols, or Robert Johnson's accessible introduction to shadow work, Owning Your Own Shadow. If you found value in this video, please consider liking, subscribing, and sharing it with others who might benefit. Your support helps make more content like this possible. Until next time, remember Jung's wisdom. I am not what happened to me, I am what I choose to become.